When you think about Christmas and the holiday season, I'm sure thoughts about presents, snow, and Santa come to mind, but have you ever thought about lost media along with these other winter icons? I'm sure most people out there probably haven't, but now you can. Because just as the categories of lost media are very expansive, there's a large amount of lost media related to the Christmas season that has gone missing. From lost portions of movies, to unreleased specials, and even a couple mysteries, you can enjoy the season with some content that nobody has ever enjoyed the season with, because it's lost. Gather around the fireplace, here's my gift to you for the holidays. And there's no better way to begin than with a topic that's pretty popular, even outside of Christmas, from a very well-known movie. So let me ask the question, is The Nightmare Before Christmas a Halloween or Christmas movie? Well, I'm pretty sure the Freeform channel plays it for both holidays, so I guess it counts as both. But no matter what season you watch it in, chances are you've caught this one on TV more than once. The Nightmare Before Christmas is a 1993 stop-motion film that was released by Walt Disney and directed by Tim Burton. You probably don't need much of an introduction for it nowadays, because it's gotten way more popular within the past several years than it ever was back when it first released. I remember actually watching this movie when I was a kid, probably sometime in the early 2000s, and it was so hard to find any merchandise for. I really wanted some toys to play with, but most of the figures were more like statues and only sold at specialty stores like Suncoast. It wouldn't be until a trip to Disney World itself when I finally found a plush of Jack. But nowadays, you can go into just about any store and get a variety of different items from it. But something you can't find, and might not ever be released, is a piece of lost media that was made earlier on in the film's production, and has become quite desired by movie buffs and fans of the series. In the movie, Santa Claus, played by Ed Ivory, makes an appearance towards the latter half, and is involved in taking back his holiday from Jack. But originally, Ivory was not set to play the character, and instead, the role was originally given to famous Hollywood icon Vincent Price. In an article with thedailybeast.com, director Henry Selick was asked about the role Price played in the movie, what was recorded, and why it ended up not being used, stating, "We recorded him, and he would have done the introduction to the film, since it's supposed to be Santa Claus's voice at the beginning and end. But Price had just lost his wife, and he was despondent. He was the first choice that didn't work out. It was a very tough voice to cast, and we just went with a local actor from San Francisco. That local actor ended up being Ed Ivory, though a couple other voice talents were auditioned before they decided on him. Unfortunately, this is where the mystery largely begins and ends, because aside from the mention that audio was recorded, it's not known exactly how much of it was recorded, or if it even still exists. There's also no word on who would have those recordings, as it's never been mentioned where they ended up. But if I had to guess, I would probably say Disney is the most likely place they'd be. They're basically movie assets that probably stayed with the company since they were scrapped from the movie itself. I'm sure even if a copy could be located, it would never be released anyway. But then again, it would make for a great addition to an anniversary release of the movie. Disney is always doing something with that franchise, and it would be great publicity for the film. Though I guess this is all dependent on how much was actually recorded. It might not be something they want to dig up anyway. The next topic in this video is another one from Disney, which is a pretty nice surprise since I don't cover a lot of Disney topics on the channel, but this one fits right in here. This one can best be described as the Christmas special that never was, because it was cancelled during production and never released. But if it had been made, maybe it would have become as memorable as some of the other animated ones that have aired throughout the holiday season. While you might not have heard about this topic before, you've probably heard about the precursor to it, Tin Toy, a Pixar short film from 1988 that won awards and received a lot of attention. Following the success of Tin Toy, the company ended up getting into commercials for big companies like Tropicana and Lifesavers, which were also very popular at the time and have become very well known today. So where does Christmas come in here? Well, it was all part of President Ed Catmull's plan to create a feature-length film using computer animation, start at the bottom and work their way up. After first becoming successful with the Tin Toy short, then moving on to commercial advertising, the next step for the team was to go to television specials, which created the idea for A Tin Toy Christmas. This special was heavily based on the original 1988 short, and had a plot written out for it, which goes on to say, Tinny was part of a Christmas tin toy line sold in the 1940s, but due to poor sales, he and his friends are put away in storage, and Tinny falls into a long sleep. After many years of slumber, Tinny wakes up in a modern-day megastore during the Christmas season. He sees that his friends are nowhere to be found, so he decides to look for them on Christmas Eve. On his adventure, he meets a rather sarcastic ventriloquist dummy who's looking for an owner. While the concept and characters were an idea that the TV networks fell in love with, they were, however, unwilling to put the money forward that would be required to produce the special. Apparently, it was going to cost somewhere around 18 times more than what the networks were willing to give out. And since Pixar's commercial animation was still so successful, they had no choice but to fall back on that and shelve this project entirely. It was never picked up in the same way again. However, if there's anything good to have come from this project having been planned at all, it was the influence it would eventually have on the creation of Toy Story. In late 1990, the head of Disney Feature Animation asked Pixar if they would produce an animated feature for the company, and it was the concept of a Tin Toy Christmas that was used to create the idea for Toy Story. Early concepts for the movie were heavily inspired by A Tin Toy Christmas, as well as some of the characters, who were said to have evolved into the main cast from the film. In fact, some early concept art of the dummy character even resembles Woody in some ways. Though unfortunately, these are the only remaining content from A Tin Toy Christmas that's resurfaced over the years. A small amount of storyboards and concept art, with no documentation on how many production materials exist from when it was originally being worked on. But even though nobody got to enjoy A Tin Toy Christmas as was originally envisioned, everyone has enjoyed the Toy Story series over the years, which wouldn't have looked the same without the cancelled special before. We've talked about a lot of kids content on the channel this year, but I think it would be fun to get into a topic related to that category of lost media, and it's one with a very dedicated community connected to it, outside of the lost media community. This topic is about the Wiggles, who were a very popular children's band from the late 90s and through the 2000s, and released a large amount of content during that period. There are lots of Wiggles media and memorabilia which have become lost or don't exist at all anymore, with one of the more popular topics being the deterioration of those creepy puppets that were used in some of their music videos. But today's video is of course holiday themed, and covers two Wiggles Christmas specials that are lost to varying degrees. The first of the two isn't quite as mysterious, but does have an interesting story behind its release. This is the Wiggles' first Christmas video called Wiggly Wiggly Christmas. This VHS was originally filmed in 1996, but wasn't released until 1997 in Australia, and then 2 years later in 1999 internationally. But the release that ended up coming out left behind some lost footage from the recording session that to this day has never resurfaced in full. After production of Wiggly Wiggly Christmas had wrapped in 1996, the group went on to film their feature film, The Wiggles Movie, in 1997. However, it was during the filming of this movie that the look of the band changed from what it had previously been to what we know it as today, with the iconic shirt emblems and belt buckles being added to their costumes. But there was a problem with this, because when Wiggly Wiggly Christmas was filmed a year prior, their costumes lacked these details, and now there's a continuity issue. Because of this, they decided to reshoot the Christmas videos after filming of the movie in 1997, and it's this new version that was released onto home media. The original recordings with the earlier costumes have never been officially released, but some of its content has leaked out. The video for Go Santa Go has resurfaced and is available online, along with a variety of photos taken from the set of The Good Ship Feathersword, though that song has no footage available. Greg Wiggle has stated he might have a copy of the video from Good Ship Feathersword, but can't release it for copyright reasons. But it's unknown if there were any other videos that were filmed and never released during this time. The second topic, though, gets even further into the unknown, as it's possible an entire Christmas concert ended up becoming lost, and has stayed that way for over 20 years. In the year 2000, the Wiggles released another Christmas album titled You'll Be Wiggling, but this time they didn't do any kind of VHS release for it, and instead, they did an entire tour to promote the album. This was their first Christmas tour, which began on December 5th and ended on December 23rd, and was notable for being the debut of many new songs, as well as changing up the traditional format of their shows. However, for as memorable as a show as this apparently was, there is very little content from it online, and very few pieces from it have resurfaced at all. The biggest finds from this search include press photos that were acquired from a couple different Australian entertainment sources, and a copy of the setlist which resurfaced in 2020. But the biggest problem with this mystery is the fact that nobody even knows if recordings exist at all. As recently as 2020, the band themselves even asked fans which material they'd like to see uploaded as part of a special release of lost and rare content. But despite the dozens of requests to see the You'll Be Wigglin' concert, nothing from it was ever posted. The Wiggles were known to film their concerts, which leads to the belief that this one simply wasn't saved, and there aren't any professional recordings that exist. There also haven't been any fan recordings to show up either, so aside from those pictures, there's nothing else from this concert that's been archived. It's kind of fun to throw in a found media topic when I can into these lost media videos, because most of the time, it relates to something completely unexpected and contains a story that needs to be told. This one is perfect to talk about here because it concludes a decades-old mystery that myself and many other people, even the official archivists of this work, have heard about before. When I started making this video, one of the topics I wanted to include was A Charlie Brown Christmas, one of the most recognizable holiday specials that's ever aired. As a kid, I remember watching this one the most out of all the Peanuts specials, but at some point I had come across an article on the Lost Media Wiki that talked about an unreleased version that no one has ever seen. Production surrounding A Charlie Brown Christmas is quite well documented, with the story being that creator Charles Schulz was constantly fighting CBS to make the special as he wanted, which included using kids as voice actors for the characters and putting in biblical quotes into the show's dialogue. At the time, this was seen as new territory, and the network was constantly worried that the entire special would fail as a result. So they wanted to insert a laugh track into the cartoon, so as they claim, audiences could connect with it better, similar to how other cartoons of the time also used them. Schulz famously rejected this idea of using the laugh track, and the special went on to become one of the most iconic in holiday history, like I mentioned before. But rumor has it that a version of A Charlie Brown Christmas was produced with the laugh track inserted into it, just in case the first release went poorly in the ratings and needed to be replaced for its next airing. The Lost Media Wiki article that mentions this basically retells the conflict between creator and network, and says that the laugh track version was never released. However, I noticed something strange in the article, and that's the lack of source next to this claim. There was only one Newsweek article from a couple years ago in the references section that talked about the laugh track version at all, but it only mentioned it existed, without any evidence either. I was really worried this would become a search just like that supposedly lost Pawn Stars documentary that the Huffington Post claimed existed, but failed to accurately cite a real source in their article. Thankfully, there was a post in the forums from user Domino Deer that cleared up this decades-old mystery. Apparently, they sent an email to the archivist of the Charles Schulz Museum asking about a variety of different Charlie Brown questions, including one regarding the laugh track cut of the special, to which the response stated, "As I have heard the story, Mr. Schulz said no to using a laugh track on the Christmas special pretty early on, and while Lee Mendelson, an executive producer, was surprised, he did abide by Schulz's wishes. As far as I know, a laugh track has never been added to any of the Peanuts specials." This is from the Charles Schulz archive, meaning it's a trusted source of information, and proves that while discussions of the laugh track did happen, they were never actually added to the specials themselves. So there is no lost version of this topic that was never released, because contrary to popular belief, it was never even made in the first place. Now we can add this piece of lost media to the non-existent category. When you think of the Christmas classics from over the decades, one of the oldest that still gets played every year is It's a Wonderful Life from 1946 by Frank Capra. Surprisingly, I actually hadn't seen or heard about this film until 2011 when they played it in my high school film class, but even back then it was still considered a classic. But when it first came out in the late 1940s, it apparently wasn't very popular when it first released, and underperformed at the box office. That's hard to believe when you think about how popular it is within American culture, and it's even harder to think about any changes that could have been made to the film itself. But apparently, there was some content that would have altered the ending of the movie, which has remained quite lost and mysterious for all these years. Without getting into too many of the plot-heavy details, for those of you who aren't familiar with the movie, there's the good guy named George Bailey, who tries to do what's right for his family and townsfolk, and an antagonist named Mr. Potter, who is greedy and tries to buy up Bailey's family-owned savings and loan office, attempting to shut it down by stealing a forgotten deposit that's needed to go into the safe. Ultimately, his malicious plan fails, as the townsfolk make up for it by donating valuables to George Bailey and saving the town from Mr. Potter's reign. But fans of the film have always wondered, whatever happened to Mr. Potter at the end of the movie, as his fate is never discussed, and it ends on a happy scene. Well, according to the Lost Media Wiki article about this film, there are remnants of 2 alternate ending scenes the movie would have taken on, one of which is another happy one, while the other is much more sinister. One of the 2 endings has the good guy George Bailey falling to his knees and reciting the Lord's Prayer, while the other one actually cuts to Mr. Potter suddenly dying from heart failure while counting the money he stole earlier in the film. In both of these scenes, Frank Capra felt that the tones were too strong for the movie. Religious expression didn't need to be so forefront, and showing Mr. Potter dead was too mean, and not in the spirit of the movie. Now you might be wondering if there is any documentation for these endings having been created. Where exactly can they be seen? Well, that's where the mystery begins, as there's not a lot of good information online discussing them. In fact, before I looked into the topic, I actually thought they were completely made up and the Lost Media Wiki article was wrong. 2 of the 4 sources used on this page only link to general reviews of the movie without any mention of the lost endings, and the other 2 link to what look like are books, though they're not cited very well and are not available to be viewed. These sources would determine the legitimacy of the topic if I could find where they were from, so I had to see what was discussed in them. Thankfully, someone had scanned one of them to archive.org, the 3rd source from the article. This book was simply called It's a Wonderful Life, written by Marie Cahill, and is more or less a picture book with captions on the side describing the scene or the content in it. On page 104, we do find a small mention of one of the alternate endings, as it states, and the original script called for the movie to end with George falling to his knees, reciting the Lord's Prayer. Wisely, Capra recognized that an overly religious conclusion would not have had the emotional impact of George's friends rushing to his side. Unfortunately, while I was not able to get or find a copy of the other book claiming to describe the Mr. Potter scene, for the sake of this discussion, let's say they're both real. This raises the question on how these authors even know about this lost content in the first place, as they seem to be the only source that even mentions it. The answer to that question is rather unclear, as they both seem to be self-named historians of the film. They didn't work on It's a Wonderful Life, and I don't think they're really known in any specific communities either. It comes down to trusting whether or not their stories are to be believed, and if they are, where exactly can we find this lost content? Going back to the Lost Media Wiki article, it claimed that Frank Capra didn't often keep unused footage, so if the Mr. Potter scene was filmed at all, as the article suggests, but wasn't used in any version of the film, then I would say there's a pretty good chance it doesn't exist anymore. And it sounds like the prayer scene was probably cut from the script before filming, so that would only exist on paper. But I've never seen an original, first draft script show up from the movie either. It's sort of a weird mystery that doesn't really change anything significantly in the movie, but it's still interesting to come across missing content like this from a movie that is so well known, but behind the scenes content that most people probably haven't heard about before. If the Mr. Potter scene does exist in some kind of master print of all the recordings they did, it would be a really cool find to see new content from a movie that's so old, but that remains to be seen. Looking back, it was a really great year for the lost media community though, as a lot of other topics got found, so maybe some of these Christmas-related ones could resurface with more material, as more people become aware they exist. But until we can unwrap them for ourselves, they'll definitely remain a mystery. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other lost media videos Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.